David Kay was just one piece of what the reporters would discover was a much larger puzzle. But to put it all together, Bartlett and Steele needed to find a way inside the cloistered world of SAIC. So they went hunting for lawsuits. Unless sealed by a gag order, court records are public. They're where secrets are revealed. And SAIC had been sued for sex discrimination, wrongful termination, falsifying data, defrauding the government.
Well, there was a very, very long list of these cases over the last really 15 to 20 years.
The number of these filings is totally out of whack. There was too much activity going on that would not be explainable in the course of normal events.
Jim Steele began calling the plaintiffs. At first, he got nowhere.
I kept trying to get this one woman to talk to me. And I finally said, why will you not talk to me? What is it that you're afraid of? And she paused, and very slowly she said, this is a very powerful company.
After several dead ends, he finally found someone who wasn't too afraid to talk.
Somebody made reference to an earlier lawsuit. And when we looked at our listing from the Superior Court in San Diego, we saw it right there, by a woman by the name of Bernice Stanfill.
Finding Bernice Stanfill in court records was one thing, but getting to her in person turned out to be quite another.
We're over some of the most spectacular country in the world, from your house.
She now lived in Alaska.
So I flew from the East Coast to Anchorage, and it seems so amazing that a lot of this story is going to be up here, not even in Anchorage, but in this little town, not even in this little town, but on this lake north of Anchorage.
Bernice Stanfill, now Bernice Stanfill King, was hired in 1972 as just the 218th employee of SAIC. She was laid off in 1987. She filed suit for wrongful termination, and after 10 years of litigation, won $1 million judgment against the company. But that wasn't what intrigued Jim Steele. It was what King had in her possession.
Jim Steele was really excited about all the documents that I have, because I have boxes and boxes and boxes of documents. In fact, I'm probably the only person who had every single annual report that was ever produced by SAI.
There were 2 separate trials, substantial depositions, huge amounts of documents produced. Me being a documents reporter, this was, of course, music to my ears.
This is the mother lode. And you always think, oh, this is great. Over here we have a person who's scared to death to talk. Now over here we have all of these documents. You can't get better than that.
King and her documents painted an insider portrait of SAIC, going all the way back to its founding in 1969 by John Robert Beister.
Bob Beister was the ultimate authority on everything at SAI. He would go on tirades, say, if this is my company, we'll do it my way.
Beister's way was to tap into the unprecedented demand for private military contractors. With the Vietnam and Cold Wars raging, Beister understood, as Bartlett and Steele would later write, that this was the perfect time for shrewd consultants to get into the war business.
As long as you could bring in a contract, you had a job at SAI. But the minute you lost your contract, you lost your job. It was general knowledge.
From King and her documents, Jim Steele learned that over the years, Beister had stacked his board with Washington heavyweights. Melvin Laird served as Richard Nixon's defense secretary before joining SAIC. William Perry and John Deutsch were on the SAIC board before going on to become defense secretary and CIA director for President Clinton. Admiral Bobby Ray Inman went back and forth, from Vice Director of Defense Intelligence under Gerald Ford to the SAIC board, from SAIC to directing Jimmy Carter's National Security Agency, and serving as Deputy Director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan. And then, back to the board of SAIC.
The joke at SAI was that we had enough generals and admirals to start our own war. And that was true.
When you bring those people into your operation, that gives you access back to the agencies. I mean, it's not just a matter of you're trying to get expertise about what to do and so forth. The whole idea of people coming in really was to bring in contracts.
If you put people from private industry into the government and then you welcomed them back and you made it lucrative for them, then you always had a friend in high places.
All defense contractors try to hire former government officials. But SAIC had something to offer that most of them didn't. Shares in a private stock program, a program managed by Bernice King. As King told Steele, because the stock was not traded on a public market, Beister and his board controlled its price, and it usually moved in one direction, up.
I could really get a feeling how that had become such a pivotal factor in the rise of that company, why they had been able to hire so many people out of the military and intelligence, and how many of those people had gotten very, very wealthy as a result of that.
It was a brilliant business plan, but as Bartlett and Steele would write, one that had echoes of a famous warning issued more than 45 years ago by President Dwight Eisenhower.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
And this is just one of these companies. I mean, there are more, and we make that point in the story that this is not the only defense contract, but this is just emblematic of what's happened. They're functioning on their own. They're totally impervious to really public input, and we as a country have really lost control of this process.
This SAIC story, it points to an element that most people don't know about, that we are outsourcing more and more of what we do, especially in the area of fighting wars, to private contractors who are unaccountable to the public and can largely stay private from sort of the prying eyes of reporters. It's pervasive and it's dangerous, I think.
Dangerous, the reporters would learn, because with so much tax money flowing into the hands of private contractors and so little oversight, things can and do go terribly wrong. Exhibit A. In June 2001, the FBI paid SAIC $122 million to create a virtual case file, or VCF, a software program that would speed up the sharing of information among agents. But the FBI abandoned VCF after the software failed to function adequately.
When SAIC delivered the first product in December of 2003, we immediately identified a number of deficiencies. 17 at the outset. That soon cascaded to 50 or more, and ultimately to 400 problems with that software.
The episode prompted FBI Director Robert Mueller to do what few in government have done: publicly criticize SAIC.
We were indeed disappointed.
In response to written questions from Bartlett and Steele, SAIC says it had had concerns about the FBI's management of VCF, but failed to adequately communicate them to the agency. But for the reporters, that's the big problem with the current system. It's in the interest of private contractors not to resist, but to comply.
Increasingly, there is no one in government with the knowledge that once existed to tell an SAIC, look, what you're doing isn't going to work. This is not what we need. Here you've got to change directions. Now the government increasingly is totally dependent on the private contractor to do the job right, and increasingly the job is not being done right.